Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Welcome to our audience out there in Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, Twitter, and Twitch. We have Angela Ortiz with us today from Places to Grow, and she does a variety of stuff that we're going to talk about today. So many exciting things. Thank you so much for joining, Angela.
I'm really happy to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Do you want to just briefly introduce yourself, how you ended up in Japan, or?
Sure. That's a long story, many years ago. My family moved to Japan when I was quite little, like kindergarten age, and we lived in Saitama, Tokyo area for about 15 years, and then moved to rural Japan, the northernmost city on the Honshu Island or prefecture, Aomori Prefecture, about 15 years ago. So all together, I've been here over 35 years and have spent most of my time here in Tokyo.
Yeah, in your profile for the Ortiz Global Academy, which is your first big volunteer group that you were organizing from the OGA, as you call it, right?
Yes.
It says that you felt a real connection to Tohoku because you had lived there, you knew the place, and
Yeah, so funnily enough, many of the towns that ended up being on the news immediately after the disaster, personally, like I recognize them because as a young child growing up in Aomori, every couple months, my father and I would drive to Tokyo for shopping, etc. And I remember this was before Google Maps, right? So I remember sitting there with the old paper atlas, like navigating these little roads, and that was kind of the first really personal sort of connection where I felt like, oh my goodness, I remember these towns suddenly. But the really strong connection was that my younger brother was actually living in Sendai, and he himself and his family evacuated. And that brought it close to home on a whole other level.
yeah. And you said your sister was also up in the area during the disaster,
Yeah, that's right.
right?
By chance, my older sister, who had since moved to Australia, her and her husband were back visiting, and they were in Aomori at the time of the disaster.
Right. Yeah. It really brings it home. You were in Tokyo, but because you had been there, you had family there, you immediately felt that initial connection and impulse. I have to help. I have to do something, right?
Absolutely, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a bit about your places to grow
Place to grow.
NPO. Place to grow. Sorry.
Yeah. So this was basically it was an evolution of OGA for Aid, which was the emergency response disaster management phase of, I guess, my experience volunteering and sort of like the start of my career in humanitarian assistance. And in 2015, the sort of startup projects we had that were focused on building the community together from an economic and community standpoint started to gain local traction. And we noticed that some of the initiatives had a future not in nonprofit, but in like purely in a business form. So when I sat back and took stock of like what we had done today, should we continue on? And I really asked myself, like, should we continue to exist? Is there a need that we're filling? And I chatted with some of my local, what I call like my local grandmas, these Japanese women that I worked with there. And they told me, they said, yeah, the roads have been rebuilt. We have Wi-Fi again. We have a lifeline. Our houses are being returned. But とりあえずそばにいてください, which means just please stay by your side. So we kind of cooperatively realized that, well, we want to do something to keep the community together. The overwhelming fear of being forgotten and that need of, wanting to be remembered was very strong with the local leaders. And then as volunteers, we noticed that there were many really positive connections and collaborations that had been done over the last 5-6 years, right? But how do you maintain those connections? Whether it was like working with a school from Tokyo or a company, are these relationships going to last? And so we thought we would fill that need. And so Place to Grow, while it focuses on the child, so our mission is inspire the next generation of Tohoku, and how we do that is through language and fitness exchange programs. It really requires the father, the mother, the grandfather, the local business leaders to get involved as well. And so through that sort of two-pronged approach, we feel that we are helping to rebuild bonds of connectivity and camaraderie amongst the local community.
That's wonderful. And you chose to focus on the Minami-Sanriku area. Can you
Yes, that's correct.
introduce why you chose that one area to focus on?
So this was also a sort of mixture of chance and maybe destiny, if you believe in that sort of thing. My father on March 12th drove as I guess, a support staff for some Norwegian journalists. And they went through many, many towns, but it was in Minami-Sanriku that my father actually spoke directly to local survivors. So that became our point of contact, just because we knew a place there. But then in our very early days of collecting supplies and fundraising, turns out that one of my former my former colleagues, when I was just working in Arubaito in Aomori, was in that town. So I went to that town with 3 trucks full of supplies and a package of newspapers and letters from his grandmother and his colleagues at the Hotel Aomori. No idea if this person had survived or if the hotel that he was working at was still there. But we did find him and we connected with the hotel. And then from then, the hotel to this day is one of our biggest partners. We do a lot of work out of their venue. We have a warehouse on their property. And it was just that kind of almost serendipitous connection that made all of us stakeholders, volunteers and locals alike, kind of take stock and sort of, I guess, treasure the forces that brought us together as a team. And then being a very small NGO, honestly, the most that we could support was a 100-kilometer radius. So we ended up just sticking in and being very focused on that one city. And that it sort of evolved from there.
Yeah, it was really. I'm showing a map of the area and footage, your photos from your book, showing the disaster after. It was just devastated, and you've done some projects. We're going to talk about a bit later to help rebuild not only the area by growing food, but also rebuild the community in terms of the emotional health of the kids and everything through some of your projects. It's really fantastic, all the work you've done. And of course, this is all volunteer. One of the interesting things I think about Place to Grow, I was listening to your 2019 report, and you're talking about everybody's volunteer, nobody takes a salary, all the money raised goes straight to the people in the area or to do what we're doing for them. And I think in terms of NPOs, NGOs in Japan, that's not always the case, right? A lot of people are getting salary from this. So I think that makes it more impressive. Wow, you guys are doing so much, and this is not your job. Everybody has jobs. This is like just your passion, right?
Yeah, it's very encouraging to hear you say that, to be honest, because it's difficult to manage both. But I think the idea was a bit of a challenge to see, like, could we do it? Could we still manage? Because it is a lot slower than it used to be. In the early days when we were getting a salary, and in the OGA for aid days, it was a bit different, the structure. So I personally felt like, oh, we're so much slower now. But again, the needs are different. And so it seemed to work. And just to your point about Minami-Sanriku and the devastation there, one of these more visual sort of compelling factors was that it was, along with, I think, Ofunato and Rikuzen Takada and Oshika Hanto, the most devastated area, like 95% infrastructure damage. It took 3 years just to sweep up the rubble. Like, if you can try to imagine that, it's incredible what recovery means and how a lot of people feel. They used to use this term like, when we recover, but recovery sort of means like, you get back to normal. Like, if you think about it from a disease perspective, like, oh, I'll get better again. I'll go back to my previous state. But after disasters, that does not exist. You're going into a new normal. You're going into a new existence. You're rebuilding a future that didn't exist before, but there is no returning to what you had. And I think that's something that's been very interesting for us as volunteers to understand. That's why, just having your roads back and your supermarkets back and your houses back, it's not enough in a way. Like there's still a huge need for the hearts and minds in terms of healing and reconnection. And that's been a journey of discovery for us as volunteers.
Wow, interesting. And of course, one of the strengths when I was researching, I've been researching you all day. This is so fun to go over this. And you do so many collaborations, especially for the Tohoku work. You were working with global medics, you were working with local organizations as well. Can you talk a little bit about your collaboration in
Yeah,
terms of
absolutely.
Tohoku?
Those are the best ones. And as I mentioned, it was really a family launched organization, and then afterwards it was just volunteers. And so we were very lean, very small, always not a lot of money. And so we realized that, and obviously all of us didn't come from this background, right? This was something we sort of learned along the way. So we realized right away that we were not going to be the origin of a lot of the support. But because we got there first and we had created a super strong local connection and a sort of almost like a logistics systems in terms of infrastructure and also in terms of communication, we were the perfect point person for the very many myriad of amazing projects that had long history, that had sort of conquered the whys and the long-term impacts. And so Global Medic was a great example of working with an international NGO. They focus on disaster relief. They build tents, they build infrastructure. They have a lot of firemen and paramedics on their team. And we were just doing local research on the ground. We would report to them. They would ship over product and supplies, and then we would help them distribute. And in many cases, they would come over physically, or they would send over to us sort of the blueprint of what to do and how to execute these projects. So it was exciting for me because the variety of projects that we were able to get involved with was huge.
Yeah. And I think to people who don't organize volunteers or don't do any kind of group organization like you have done so many times, they don't realize how much work it takes to put on, right? To even deliver food or deliver water. Tell us a little bit about that process. Like if you have a shipment of food and water that you want to take to Tohoku, like how far in advance do you need to start planning and collaborating and talking with
Mhm.
volunteers? It's a long process, right?
It is. It's really long, and so it also changes depending on the phase of. So if we're going to talk about disaster specifically, like in the immediate aftermath, these were like 2-day projects. So a great example was one day in April, I got a call from a church in Ishinomaki, and they said we have tons of people. We want to do like a soup line, takidashi, right? And that was the better part of one afternoon coordinating location, trucks, how many people, what sort of jobs there are for them to do, the whole sort of schedule of what needs to be done. And within 24 hours I was standing there in the middle of this rubble, and like 20 trucks show up, and we lead them into this hinanjo, this emergency shelter, which was the Utatsu Junior High School. And these teams were amazing, right? Like they knew exactly what they were doing. Some people were on kitchen duty, some people were peeling potatoes, some people were filling up, getting the generators running. The other people were engaging with local staff, which is super important, and a lot of people overlook this. Even if it's just hi, hello, how are you? You're building these trust bonds, then you can coordinate them like, okay, line up here. This is where you guys can sit. This is where you can eat. And these were really exciting, really intense times, and they brought a lot of joy. And I think that's where I learned the basics. But if we fast forward 10 years, now, for example, Santa Soul Train, which is a collaboration with easily over 150 stakeholders, this takes us all year long, talking to the companies, getting their buy-in, and then you coordinate the schedule, then you coordinate volunteers, then volunteers need specific roles because each of them need to act as an autonomous box within the sort of bigger picture of the project. So if you have a volunteer coordinator, they're going to want to know in advance who's showing up at what time, when do they need to be back in Tokyo, are they taking the train, if it's a carpool, are they arriving in Tokyo with enough time for them to catch the last train home. And then on the other side, locally, it's basically the same thing, but with the local leaders. How many mothers do we have engaged? Is there going to be like children involved? Do they need transportation to and from? And then if you want to, like, if it's got PR elements, then that's a whole other, aspect of that. So you've got, if you put them in like little, like think of it as like a modular leadership approach, you've got these little boxes. Each one has a leader that knows that scope of what they're doing, and they have clear communication line with the other leaders. And that's the only way to really function effectively, because otherwise everything will potentially go through one leader at the top, and then it's days and hours, and it's really ineffective.
Yeah.
Is what we've kind of
So
learned.
you've learned to delegate. So important.
Absolutely. It's a work in progress. I mean, it's like something you'll probably always be learning, but definitely have learned how to delegate and how to clarify, you know, what are the key action points, which ones are really important, and which ones it doesn't really matter if you check this box, as long as you check, you know, the higher box.
Wow.
Those are really key.
So is this, I mean, this is all in the Japan Times article. You said you have an MBA in grit, that you've just learned everything on the ground, like just hard work, and you've just learned from experience. You haven't done like degree programs and stuff. This is all just trial and error, keep going, don't give up. It's amazing.
Yes, very much so. that has been the case. That was kind of just the path that I found early on in life, because I grew up in rural Japan, so we didn't have international schools, and so I had to do long distance education from quite a young age, and that just carried on into my adult life. And then when we hit Tohoku phase, there was no other option. Like, I didn't have time to take a few months off to go do, you know, sustainable management. I did in 2014. I took a couple months and I took training at Temple University on MPO management. But most everything was just being really open-minded and learning how to implement. So sort of like creating this like feedback loop of what doesn't work. So I talk about this in the book, where it's like fail forward successfully.
Mm-hmm.
That was something I learned by reading a book called Psycho-Cybernetics, which was a fascinating, very, very scientific novel on how our brains teach themselves. And it's written by the guy who developed plastic surgery, and noticed how some people will have their new face and not be happy, and why. And anyway, it's an incredibly insightful book about how the brain learns. And so I took that very literally and just applied it to everything I was tasked to do. And along the way, realized there's some things that I could pick up really quickly, and some things, you know, just not going to be my forte. Wow. So then those are the ones that I need to, you know, outsource or surround myself with the people who do excel in those skills, so that we can have a balanced team.
That's great. It's great that you've learned that and you've applied it, and it's been so successful in getting things done that you really felt passionate about doing. It's really impressive. Let's talk about Santa Soul Train, because that's such a big event that you've been doing every year for a few years now, right?
Yes, it's such a good event. And the story is fantastic, because I think it's growing up overseas, and I come from a multicultural family. My father's Colombian, my mom's from the States. Christmas or holiday was a time that we got together, and we were able to create like our own family culture around it. And, you know, every year there was arguments about, do we open presents on Christmas Eve, or is it the American style? And we would, you know, I would invite my Japanese friends over, and often I would get comments from them saying that, you know, wow, being at your house is like going to another world or another country. And those were always really special times for me. And so in 2011, you know, we were going into the phase where local people were moving into temporary homes, and there was a lot of emotional panic going on. They had gotten used to life in emergency shelters. Like, if you can imagine, they had actually sort of adapted. And then they were being asked to relocate again. They were being moved away from the people they had grown close to again. And there was so much insecurity. And so myself and my colleague at the time, I was like, we've got to just do something fun. We've got to do something inspiring, and without like it doesn't need to check like a long-term sustainability box here. And so we decided to throw a Christmas party. And the American military base in Misawa, in Yokosuka, they sent up cakes and cookies, and the international schools in Tokyo sent up centerpieces, and people volunteered to dance and sing. And the night, we had about 250 local residents come together, and we brought turkey. It was the first time they'd ever had turkey, and it was like an international buffet, right? And I remember at one point this choir from Aomori started singing, and the older generation in Minami-Sanriku, they just got up and started dancing. And we had old grandmothers dancing with 20-year-old volunteers from England, and it was just like this feeling of happiness and family that you get that I've only ever experienced at these holidays at home. And I thought that was it. It was really wonderful. I remember that we were sent candy canes for the children. And so I had told a volunteer, like, okay, give these candy canes to every child who walks in the door. And I heard an old grandfather going, "What are those? Oh, I've seen those on television once." And I remember just turning around going, like, scratch that plan, give it to everybody who walks in the door. Like, just make them laugh, make them go, wow. And so then 2012 rolls around, and I had completely forgotten about this. And the local leaders got down and they were like, "So, Angela, I think we need to do this party again." And that year, 450 people showed up. And since then, it's just been a evolution of celebrities joining. And the Santa Soul Train, like Project Tidal, came about in 2014 when one of an NHK performer named Stuart O came on the scene and introduced the entire community into like the conga line. And so he does this soul train, and the children get up on stage, they dance, they sing, local people perform now. And the really cool aspect that I absolutely love is that, remember when I was talking earlier about how do we keep connections between communities? This just organically became a platform for that. And so every year now, students in the international schools in Tokyo will make cards and fill stockings with small things like candies and oranges and different toys. But the cards go in there. And these cards go to every single child in Minami-Sanriku now. And then from 2014, 15, when, I don't know if you remember, but there were some really horrendous disasters in the Philippines and then in Nepal. So we asked the local children of Minami-Sanriku, would you like to make cards for these children in other areas? And these children, having gone through that experience, they got it. I mean, these are like 8 and 9-year-old kids, right? So now there's like this like a baton tachi, like these children just creating cards for other children in different communities. And our job as volunteers is just like massive logistics and coordination to try and help people feel connected during this time. And last year or 2 years ago, as we took stock, do you need us to fulfill this role? How far has ownership grown? The local city office, like the local leaders, almost like 90% of the project now, they run, they fund. And so there's just that real sense of ownership that has been developed that for me makes me feel like, yeah, this is such a worthwhile thing. There are kids now who don't know Christmas without Santa's Soul Train. And
that's awesome. Yeah.
It's just really heartwarming to feel that there's this moment where they get together as a community and say, "Otsukare-sama desu," and let's keep going next year. So the project evolved beyond my wildest dreams, and I'm just really happy with how it's continued to be a positive thing for the local community, the kids and the leaders alike.
I mean, that is the perfect example of ideal sustainable product in terms of sustainable tourism, sustainable product building. You are developing something new that helps them bond as a community, and then passing on management to the local community themselves, and they own it, right? And you've just kind of started the ball rolling, and then passed it on to them.
This is
it's great.
Such an interesting point I want to share on that, because it's counterintuitive. When you think about these projects, oftentimes we want to do them perfectly. And also, I think as humans, like, we don't want to make mistakes. So we will execute them perfectly. But when you do that, this is what I noticed, is that when you do it perfectly, you leave no room for local leaders to say, "Oh, hey, I can do it actually better." And so what we like, what I did, because I'm constantly failing forward, is just be quite transparent about the things that, oh, we're not doing this quite so well. And that gives them like a really easy sort of madoguchi, like a place to just step up and go like, oh yeah, we could take care of this. And actually we can probably do it better than you guys. So thank you for your efforts, but we'll manage this. And then we just kind of work together through that. And that was something I learned kind of by accident, but I recommend like purposely not doing it 100% perfectly in order to allow other people to grow into those leadership roles.
And that is such great advice for anybody trying to work with local communities in Japan, is to be transparent and to be honest about what you're struggling with. And usually somebody in the group will step up and be like, oh, I can do that. Or, like you said, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really great.
It is a fine line, but
I have this picture here where it's from the video. You've got some great videos on your YouTube channel showing the Santa Soul Train, how fun it is, all the preparation and everything. So you usually have about 1,000 kids or 1,500 kids who are enjoying the event. Is that right?
So for the actual event, there are altogether about 2,000 children that get connected. And then we have to do a series of events in various places because we don't have one space that can fit them all at one time. But yeah, so it's like groups of a couple hundred. I think 300 in one place is probably the biggest one. And then it'll be at gymnasiums, anywhere from like 20 children in one little neighborhood. And that's why it's the Santa Soul Train, like it stops in lots of different places, but the energy just sort of like goes through the villages or the towns or the region.
Wow. And then you have, like you said, you have some local performances, student groups, or people will do their local dances or something. I saw some of the pictures. They're wearing like a long happy coat or
yes. Yeah, that was an interesting, really also super heartwarming aspect was, again, it's kind of like what I said, like not doing everything perfectly. Like when we got to the point where we're like, oh, we can't really bring a A-list celebrity, or like, what should we do? And they're like, oh, we have this local dance group. And if this was 2014, and these girls got up there and they just killed it with their energy and their excitement. And, these are young girls dancing. And for us, it was more inspiring to watch them than any performance we could have sort of brought up there. And I didn't realize this at the time, but the mothers told me later, they're like, they don't get to perform on a stage like this every day. So for them, it's something they look forward to all year long. They'll practice for it, they'll train for it. It's that moment of activation, that moment of them being able to show their growth, that I think it's just a real win-win. But also we do have amazing volunteers. Like I have to mention Stuart O again, because this guy will get on a train, be up there at 6 a.m. and go like school to school, dancing and singing and distributing and just doing his thing. And we just have to keep up with him. And other volunteers like that, Hayami Yu, who if she can't come up that year because of her schedule, she's, quite a big celebrity, she'll send a video. To make sure that those faces are recurring faces, and then they, the community bonds build, I think, through that.
That's wonderful. You've created such a great event there. Well done. And are you preparing for it for this coming year, or are things kind of on hold with coronavirus? So yeah.
Well, we probably we potentially won't be able to do it the same way we did before, but. So weirdly, I don't know how the timing works with this, but this year is our 10th Santa Soul Train, because we had our very first one the year of the earthquake, right? So it's such a big marker that we can't let it not go. But just 2 days ago, I was talking with the local grandmothers, and, can we stream from the stage? Can we, because now Wi-Fi is more popular, people have cell phones. Can we just stream straight into people's houses? Can we send these stockings like door to door? Could we, engage the local post office to help us? Like, how can we do this? We're just going to throw like all the creativity we have at it to make sure that it happens. But yeah, maybe it won't be the way that we have been doing it so far.
Yeah. Well, hopefully by December, people are back to school, they're back to work, trying to think of ways to social distance, to be safe about it, but getting things kind of going again. Is it possible to do some of the stuff you do outside? It's too cold, right?
We do one outside actually in the evening, so that's not that's actually an option. Like I remember texting going like, I think the new park is going to be rebuilt by then. Could we just make it like, in Europe they have those wonderful holiday Christmas markets? Maybe it's a little bit more yatai style with the matsuri food, atmosphere. I don't know. It'll be fun to plan it though.
Yeah. Well, it sounds great. You were talking about membership. If people want to help sponsor events like this, you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have corporate sponsors and individual sponsors. We just launched a membership program this year. So for 6,000 yen, you sponsor one child to the Santa Soul Train as well as to the monthly workshops that we do. And what we can do with this more tight collaboration is share more of the stories directly to you as a supporter, like the faces of children and the personal stories, which are not so appropriate for just social media. But for corporates, you can sponsor like the event itself. You can send volunteers. We're now obviously due to COVID revisiting how they can get involved, but everything you can find on our website. And if you want to be a volunteer, you can sign up there as well. But yeah, any and all support is so very much appreciated.
Yeah, and you guys give a great shout out to any of your partners and people who support you. So it's also a great, like we'll talk about CSR a bit later. It's also a great way to improve your company's brand by sponsoring events like you do. Right?
Yes, absolutely. When we were talking earlier about how we became, the point person for a lot of other people's support, that's sort of how I feel about the Santa Soul Trend. Like if you're a company giving product or cash or volunteers, like we wouldn't be able to execute this without all that support. So to me, that sort of transparency, that sort of thank you is so so necessary, it's so relevant, and that's the authentic way I think to do these programs. Having said that, we try to encourage a real win-win between, so what are the value that the company's getting, whether it's their employees, whether it's being able to repurpose product that otherwise would have gone into the trash, for example. How can we work together to save resources, inspire communities? And that real like needs with resources always been a really strong pillar for us. And it's kind of cool that we can see these things in a real sort of social project like this, and they still really matter.
Yeah,
so.
That's great. And you mentioned you've got new partners for 2020, and I know them because they've been in the series. Do you want to introduce?
Oh,
Miami
yes, absolutely.
And JJWalsh have both been in the series so far.
Oh, wow, I didn't even know that. But yes, we met. Well, I've known Robin Lewis for a long time, actually. And so when Miami-Zoo launched, obviously I'm a huge fan. And we wanted to bring the values that they're bringing to the world. We wanted to include that into the education that we bring to the children and also to the towns themselves. So we are bringing elements of Miami-Zoo philosophy into Minami-Sanriku and just making sure that children are growing up with these ideas, not values necessarily, but these practical examples of what companies are doing, what individuals are doing, so that they can be inspired as they go on to choose their occupation in the future.
Yeah, and connected to what JJWalsh does with teaching people how to grow their own food in the urban areas, you have also set up some farming in the Miyagi area, right?
Yes, that started in 2011 as a way to keep the elderly community members busy in Minami-Sanriku. And also people were buying produce in Tokyo or Chiba and then shipping it up to Minami-Sanriku. And one of our volunteers who came up, Drew Taylor, came and said, I can teach you how to grow tomatoes. And then of course we turn around and who do we have sitting there around doing nothing? Like hundreds of farmers, right? Who know more than we do. So that was how that project got started, and then it spun off into its own farming company. It's now called Green Farmers Miyagi, and the co-founder of OGA for Aid is the shacho of that company now, and they still work there. They are the largest producer of long onions now in the Motoyoshi-gun area.
That's wonderful to have local source of vegetables for local people. You were talking about like people shipping in food. I mean, that's crazy when you've got such lush, wonderful agriculture land, right?
Well, now they have that, but it was predominantly a fishing village.
Mm-hmm.
So the arable land has sort of just been sitting there. It took a lot of work to get these farmlands sort of back to where they're producing to the level that the communities need it. But I think, again, that's just sort of an example of where NGOs can fill that need. And I think John Walsh is a great example of filling these needs and helping people connect the dots. What's also really heartwarming for me about working with John Walsh in the future is that they're connected to Second Harvest, which was another really strong supporter of ours in the beginning. Again, we were the point people. The food came from Second Harvest, and we would deliver these to 2,800 families. And so it feels like a sort of it's come full circle, and I'm really excited about what we can do and how those education points can stay relevant on into the next generation.
Right. Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your book that you just published. A lot of the ideas you've already been talking about, of course, you're featuring in the book and giving people inspiration for how they too can move forward. Like you talked about a lot of the concepts like failing forward and so many great examples in there. You want to introduce your book to us? Go ahead.
I do. Thank you. So here it is in paperback. You can get it also as an ebook on Amazon, but it's really just a lead, like tips for how to become an effective leader in social impact. And I guess a leader in any field, really. But this was just my experience. And as I went to write this book, I originally thought it was going to be more of a dramatic saga about the sort of intense moments that I felt and saw up there, which is a story I think that still needs to be told, but it wasn't the one I discovered. And so as I went in there, I quickly started asking myself, like, what value is this going to bring to the readers, and who cares really about what I've gone through? And then I suddenly realized there was some stories that really stuck out to me, and I thought, oh wow, yeah, these are the key points that I learned that helped me sort of create this life and even my career now. And so I just wanted to share that with the next generation of social impact leaders and also with other leaders in this field, because it is a very complicated field. And CSR, like as a term, is one confusing. It has a bad name. We've gone through the phase of CSR PR, where companies just do slap a logo on a project and then put it up on their website and feel like they've checked a box. But there's a lot more to this. As I mentioned, like in the conclusion, at the heart of every volunteer experience, what you get to see is an example of the human connection and why that's so important. So on a granular level, how do you make long-term impact? You won't unless you are connecting the hearts and minds of people. And then, of course, are you facilitating a practical next step for them? And I just find that really fascinating. And I hope that this will enable, people, students, leaders far smarter and more connected than I am to be able to do, well, a better job at it.
No, I thought it was brilliant. I'm reading the ebook right now,
Oh,
and
cool.
I have my favorite part that I just chose. Whatever you do in life, choose to do it rather than reacting. Be intentional. Above all, do it for yourself. No matter what you do, you will then be the greatest beneficiary of your actions. So that's not only about volunteering. If you feel like you want to help, go do it. But that's also about entrepreneurship. That's also about so many things. Living in a more ethical, sustainable life, right?
Yes, I think it's really applicable to anything that you want to be a part of, and specifically if you're passionate about a subject and you feel like you have ideas that could make a difference there. I've come to realize, like, no one's going to sit around and wait for you to, like, no one's going to say, oh, you might have an idea and help you get there. You're going to have to just take a chance on yourself. And the best way you could probably do that is by getting so, like, choosing to matter in that field to the degree that you become really knowledgeable about that. And then if you can encourage and help other people, like help other people's growth game, then I feel like it does come full circle to you. And I would recommend having a more strategic approach so that you can leverage the things you learn. It's just an accelerated process there, I've found. And so I
Yeah,
just
great.
heartily recommend that.
Yeah. And I love the afterword prologue written by Sarah Jean, who, of course, is in the series as well. And she looked like she did some training for your volunteer group. You want to talk about the social impact training you guys did?
Absolutely, yes. I met Sarah Jean in 2011, and I have been waiting 9 years to work with her this closely. So I was so excited when in 2019 we were able to partner on the Develop Yourself to Inspire Others training workshop, which she now runs. I encourage all of our volunteers to take it because you get all the practical advice from someone who, she has decades of knowledge in this field about how to navigate social spaces, how to have those conversations with stakeholders. And so we do this. There are, I believe, 8 throughout the year, and they're now online, of course. 2019 was our pilot year, and this year is, again, we're learning as we go. But the idea is to help inspire more competent social impact leaders, I suppose. I think Sarah Jean's phrase, "You do good, let me help you do it better," just perfectly expresses what she's doing and what she's helping lead.
Yeah, it's great. She's a real inspiration for me. She's been doing what I'm trying to do or what I'm aiming to do 15 years, and I've just been doing it for a year. So she has so much experience and knowledge to pass on to anybody trying to make a difference in what they're doing for career or volunteering or even personal life. Yeah, really inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. She's such a great example of one of the core principles of this book, which is that peer-to-peer role models, that we often get sidetracked or maybe even a little intimidated by trying to follow these really uber grandiose role models, right? People from history, Gandhi and JFK and whatever line of work they're in. But it's actually the people in our social circles, our parents, our friends, our mentors, that we actually gain the most knowledge from. And for me, it was just so brilliant to be able to connect her to a lot of these younger um, entrepreneurs that I'm working with and that I have the pleasure to call colleagues. Great
Yeah.
place to grow.
That's great. Well, talking about being a mentor to young generation, you have an event coming up. Do you want to introduce your event?
Yes, I do. So this is a whole new initiative for me, but I created a brand called Strategist just a few months ago. Thanks to COVID and having a lot of time at home, I took another online learning course and decided I wanted to again share my knowledge with the next generation. And so it's just a brand that organizes workshops and masterminds to help the aspiring entrepreneur, and specifically focused on millennials because unlike a lot of people, I think millennials are awesome. I think they get social impact to a degree that no other generation has so far, and I really want to tap into those values and help them become more strategic leaders. And so that's the purpose of my new brand, Strategist. You can go to strategist.com. My first workshop is coming up August 29th, and it's a 3-hour training with some really cool, very clear sort of benefit points for the participants.
That's awesome. Let's switch gears a little bit. I would love to hear more about your work with Adidas, with the CSR initiatives that they're doing. I'm very excited about some of their new initiatives, which you know a lot about. Can you tell us about it a little bit?
Yeah, I have been working with Adidas actually, as it's called, just what 2.5 years as their CSR manager here in Japan, and really, really happy to be supporting their initiatives globally. They've committed themselves to be leaders in this field, and it's a long and difficult road for these large companies. But it's great to see leaders who are not afraid to have the tough conversations, and of course, being a brand that uses a lot of plastic, polyester, etc. This is an area that we can make a difference in. So we have chosen End Plastic Waste. You can find this like on our website, and we have a lot of products now made from recycled polyester, from recyclable shoes to the new collaboration with Allbirds, which is, again, that's another sort of first step, is to collaborate with what potentially most people in a traditional sense would think is a competitor. But in order to really achieve circularity, to really move into a sustainable future, these sorts of collaborations, thinking outside the box, are just obvious and so important for business long term. So we are moving away from CSR actually phase into what we call purpose-driven brands, into long-term sustainable approaches. And this is where, honestly, like, we use these terms sustainability and purpose and social impact, but it's really about what I'm starting to call like purpose innovation, where the reason to do this is so that your business will last 50 years, 100 years into the future. And to do that, you need to take into account what's happening in society, right? What's happening in the environment. And this is just really good business sense.
Yeah. I
from our
saw,
perspective.
for sure.
Why I'm really happy to be working with them.
That's great. I remember a fantastic documentary about Kikoman, the shoyu maker. And it used to be the shoyu maker for the emperor. And the owner was talking about, I want my brand, my company, my product to last 100 years, 1,000 years. I don't only want it to be successful this year. You know, and I think you're right in, you have to have like a long-term vision about the longevity of your product and your brand, and making small changes now, like using 50% recycled material from ocean plastic in your products. Doing those kind of small changes seems small, but compared to other companies that maybe aren't doing anything right now, it's going to help move the brand forward into the future. And like you were talking about, millennials get social impact. Millennials really are woke about climate change, right? So this is the brand for young people. This is speaking their language. So that what you are doing must be really interesting. Must be very difficult because it goes against the traditional business as usual grain for a big company.
Yeah, it's challenging, but what's really interesting, one year, this was actually before I was working at Adidas, but I was on a panel with some small, like, ethical fashion designers, and it was so fascinating for me to understand and educate them on how everyone has a role. So some of the leading companies in sustainability, you'll find that originally were family owned, like H&M, like Patagonia, and like Adidas. And they, it mattered to them, right? And because they have this big footprint, they make huge impact. But if they weren't making those big impacts, it would be impossible for small ethical designers to afford or to even have access to more sustainable materials. Because you have to do work on the farm level, on the transportation issues, on chemicals in the supply chain, on human rights in the supply chain. Like, these are very big, very complicated cross-industry, cross-country issues that are being tackled. We're going on into like the third decade where this is common practice. It's not something that a small, fashion brand can really take on. But for a consumer's perspective, they're going to connect to the story of the ethical fashionista, right? And they're going to build trust. And then when they see, oh, those are the things that need to happen for me to trust, like transparency in the supply chain. And then they see the big brands also having these, it really does have this positive knock-on effect. And that's where it isn't a competition. It's really working together to change an entire industry that did take centuries to get to this point. It's going to take decades and maybe even longer to move and to evolve into something that's more sustainable. Sorry, that's
no.
Really excited about this.
I love it. I love your passion. I mean, you were working for H&M. You were part of the Close the Loop project to take back used clothing and repurpose it as well. And similar kind of concept with Adidas right now. Can you explain?
Yes, Adidas launched their Take Back program last June, actually. And so they've been doing pilot projects in various markets throughout the world to see which one works well. And, as technology is also advancing so fast, it makes sense to figure out different ways of, making it easy for the consumer to bring back their old clothes. So you can bring back old shoes, old clothes, old, towels even. And certain brands will take accessories. Adidas does take some accessories like belts and caps and bags and things. And then we work with a global recycling company called iCollect, and they actually do the sorting and redistribution, downcycling, upcycling, and to help sort of close that loop on the fashion industry. It's a real collective. Like on the market level, you can see like every brand has their own way of doing it, but on the back end, it's really a joint effort across the world, really, and across the industry.
Yeah, I was reading about Patagonia also trying to use more repurposed materials and taking back used materials. They also have a repair station in their shop, right? Like just
Yeah.
trying to extend the life of your product, and if you can't, then repurpose it in some way, like Adidas and H&M and other companies you worked with are doing.
Yeah,
It's
it's really key to get the consumers or the customers engagement, because even if brands like Adidas can make recyclable products, and that's to say like this shirt could be completely recycled if you brought it back. If you don't bring it back, it still ends up as waste. And so that's why over these last 5, 6 years, you've seen the growth in consumer focused stories, because we got to the point where we realized, oh, wait, we can have all the innovation and technology upgrading in the world. If our customers are not sort of in on the story, we won't have the success that we're looking for. We're going to reduce the waste. That's really interesting. But one really cool thing I will share with you in terms of like what's happening on the design side and the factory sort of level is when we cut out, whether it's a shoe or a shirt or a dress, there used to be a lot of textile waste in the way that we cut the shirts out. But now through technology and using like laser design and all these software tools that I don't know, we're able to do what they call like no waste patterning. And I think that's really quite like, it's a really tiny step, but it reduces like hundreds and thousands of tons of waste.
That's amazing. And I was reading as well, they found a way to get a robot chain to put the shoes together without the need for glue. And glue is another waste material, which of course is bad for the environment. So it's you really putting to use technology, but also, like you said, getting the consumer involved, bringing back their products, not just throwing it away. It's changing the way we shop, it's changing the way we live a little bit.
Yes, I hope so.
So we've got 7 more minutes. Is there anything we haven't talked about yet that you'd like to touch on?
We've done the training, the organization.
Yes.
That is, I mean, I feel like we've gone through everything that I do on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Other than maybe,
Time management, like you're a single mom, right?
Yes.
You're managing an MPO and a full-time job. Let's talk about you. How
I'm
do
up
you
to my neck
balance?
in birthday plans right now. My daughter's 18th birthday was this weekend, and so we're having a party tomorrow. Yeah, so one of the first gifts I got actually in 2011 was this book on time management. And it was not the best book, because what it made me do was always be on my phone. So like I'm waiting in line at the store, I'm checking emails, I'm checking Excel spreadsheets, I'm sending things, I'm researching. But it did help me develop a habit of, am I always using my time? So there was a point where I didn't see the point of listening to music, for example, or watching movies, because there was documents I could be reading or documentaries I could be doing research on. And there's always these things to do. And over the years, I started to realize, you have to have a balance. It's time for fun. So I have my favorite Netflix shows, and I love watching movies. And I love more though is productivity. So what I have now is really simple. I have this task list that I use on Excel, and it covers all, like everything from my corporate job to my mommy duties. of the things that need to be done. And I find that it's just really simple to sort of check those things off. I do sometimes fail on the mommy duties, the housekeeping, the
How?
cooking,
Yeah.
not so much. So luckily my daughter has stepped up. She's a much better chef than I am, and she'll let you know.
But you're an avid athlete. You talk a lot about keeping fit. Did I read somewhere that you were in Spartan? Is that right?
Yes. I ran my first Spartan race in 2017. And then in 2018, I tried the elite category, and I came in actually in third place in Japan.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it really blew my mind about what your body can do, like with the training and with the focus. And then I through the years, I've had different health crises where I've had to realize how connected the mind and body is. And I was listening to this podcast once by Tony Buzan, and he talked about healthy body, healthy mind as an ancient Grecian sort of philosophy. And then when I look back at my history, I was just connect the dots. I was like, yeah, when my body's feeling good, when I have energy, I can go, and it's fun. It's not exhausting. But when my body's not in a peak state, then I struggle, and then I have lack of clarity. So even small things like business decisions, and being able to pivot from corporate to being a mom to the NGO, if I've got my health, then I'm a much better leader. I'm more focused. I have more clarity. I can support other people so much better. So I really enjoyed Spartan because I had done a marathon in 2014, first ever. And then I did these long distance cycle races for the charity. And I was like, oh, I should try, a triathlon. But I'm not the best swimmer. And trying to figure out what to do next, I tried Spartan, and I was like, oh my God, yeah, this is just great. I was like a monkey in the jungle climbing. It's so much fun. I feel
Yeah.
like a kid again. It's
It
one of
it
my
looks
favorite
it
things.
looks brutal, but it looks like so much fun.
It
I
really is.
we in our family we are big American Gladiator fans, and Spartan fans, and I did triathlon for years. In my 20s and 30s, I didn't continue past then. So go, girl! I will root you on.
There's lessons though in there, like the growth that you see, like for example, not being able to do a pull up or not being able to climb the rope. That was a huge one for me.
Oh
My
yeah.
first one, I completely failed, and I walked away really sad and sort of disheartened. And then train, and then 3 months later you go in and you nail it, and you just feel confident, and you can see that growth in such as like it's a great example of what you can do then with your mind, right? Of if you continue reading or you stay connected, you'll end up in different places like maybe you didn't think possible. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts we can share with the next generation is don't limit yourself to think, whether it's the town you grew up in or the stories that are in your head, you can go beyond that. And there are people out there who can show you the way. Success leaves clues. This is one of my new favorite things, which I'm incorporating into Strategist is, I love that progress journey. So I just want to help other people find their why and perfect it and get them going, because there's a lot of cool problems we have right now, a lot of them, but a lot of, I think, amazing solutions and innovations that are being done. But it's going to be the people that ultimately, make that real or say, oh, it can't be done. So
Wow, that's great. And don't you find by really pushing yourself physically, it's almost like meditative. It releases not only the stress of the workday, but it kind of frees up your mind because you're concentrating on just getting through something grueling, that it kind of frees your mind of all the daily thoughts, and new ideas sometimes come in even though you're physically exhausted.
oh,
I,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
For sure.
I love that.
I think
Well,
it's really good to give our bodies that mix and match between physically exhausting, but like it frees up the mind, and then some of these mentally exhausting tasks like coordinating the Santa Soul Train, but then your body can relax. So
yeah.
there's a nice yin and yang there.
Yeah. And you've incorporated some healthy, like Ragio Taiso stuff or exercise in your projects in Tohoku as well, right? With Sogo?
Yes. Yes. So Sogo Fitness is just a community here in Tokyo of people who get together and work out. And I trained with them for a Spartan race. And then some of their founders had created this Radio Taiso Extreme. And, I talk about in the book how I didn't go to Japanese school, so I'd never done Radio Taiso. But it's a really traditional Japanese sort of group exercise. And in the aftermath of the disaster, people were doing it in many places just to have something to do together. And so for me, this is one of the things I love about social impact is like, I'll find this new modern version, right? So the kids are super excited about it. They're doing burpees and squats and all these cool new sort of exercises, but the grandfathers in the room recognize the activity so they can join in. And suddenly you've created like a generation connection point. You've created energy. It connects with the traditions, but it's so like forward looking. And those are the projects, the ideas that really sort of like spark joy for me. So we brought Radio Taiso Extreme. We taught the children every month on our monthly workshops. And then at the Santa Soul Train last year, we had 100 kids from all ages on stage doing the Radio Taiso Extreme.
That's awesome.
It's just the best.
I love that because it's Japanese culture. And it's fun, and it's a new style of using traditional Japanese culture. I love it.
Yeah.
And I'm really a big fan of everything you're doing. Thank you so much, Angela, for all your hard work and all your different plates you have spinning in the air.
There are a lot of people I work with, so I'm just really privileged to be part of this community. But thank you so much for having me today. It's been really fun.
Yeah, really great. Thank you so much. And we'll have to reconnect again soon and hear more about your online seminars and all the other exciting things you're doing.
I'll keep you posted.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And join us again next week. Have a nice long weekend in Japan. Enjoy your daughter's 18th birthday.
Thank you. I will.